Why did Sony dominate this generation? It's easy to figure out. A tried and true formula mixed with lessons learned and then unlearned by their competition. Sony learned a very valuable lesson last console cycle, a lesson completely lost on Microsoft, that when you start from behind, you double down on giving the fans what they want to fill the gap. A little backstory for those who don't know. Sony debuted the PlayStation 3 on May 16, 2005, at E3. A year later, the hardware's configuration and prices were unveiled. Sony showed a 20GB model at $499 and a 60GB model priced at $599 respectively. Needless to say, the reception of the news of a $600 console did not go over well with the community. That, coupled with Sony's use of their own proprietary hardware within the PS3, known as a cell processor, that would have made it harder for developers to work with. Sony started that generation off on completely the wrong foot. This was surprising to many, considering they were coming off of the PlayStation 2, where they completely dominated, with their sales numbers reaching 158 million consoles sold by the end of the life cycle. The PlayStation 3 was off and running, $100 more a year behind the competition and losing big money on every console, with more complex hardware and only one arrow in its quiver. So now let's quickly analyze Microsoft's position this generation. If you're big on tech, the Xbox One reveal should have been right up your alley. Seeing how the majority of the 1-hour presentation was focused on the Xbox One being an all-in-one entertainment device rather than just a game console. Microsoft was all too happy to show off the multimedia capabilities and television integration for almost 30 minutes before getting to what we all wanted to see, and that was the games. And seeing Xbox's results this generation, it's quite clear why they showed so little in the first place. If that weren't bad enough, the Xbox One came with quite a few conditions to use that were far from consumer friendly, such as the console always having to be connected to an internet signal to be functional, restriction on used games, it being coupled with a mandatory Kinect camera that would have driven the price up $100, and a lackadaisical attitude towards its consumer base in general. That if they didn't have the necessities to use the Xbox One to its fullest, they should stick with the Xbox 360.
Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Right. So stick with 360. That's your message if you don't, if you don't like it?
If you have zero access to the internet, that is an offline device. I mean,
needless to say, Microsoft had second thoughts about the road it was beginning to walk. Not only about the stipulations, but about Don Magic as well. Within a month and a half, both the stipulations would be dropped, and so was Don Magic. But the damage was done. If only they had looked further down that road and taken a page from Sony's book, they could have avoided the train wreck that was to come. The parallels are there whether you choose to see them or not. A console maker tripping over its former glory, putting out another console to unfriendly consumer response, but here's where the similarities end. At the end of the 7th console generation, Sony had all but closed the gap with Microsoft, even edging the Xbox 360 out with less time on the market, with the Xbox 360 selling 84 million units and the PlayStation 3 selling 87 million units. And I know Nintendo fans are laughing right about now. They realize this argument is moot when you take into consideration that the Wii dominated that generation with 101 million units sold. But that's another story. However, the Xbox One's numbers this generation are so bad, it's hard to find an accurate sales figure because Microsoft refuses to release them. All estimates indicate the Xbox One has sold 41 million units of their console this generation. A rather dismal matchup against PlayStation 4 sales that stand firmly at almost 110 million consoles sold. So what happened? Why was Sony able to come from behind and fill the gap successfully in the 7th generation of video game consoles, and Microsoft was not this generation? I'm sure there could have been other deciding factors, but in the end, I think the true and most overwhelming was the games. Though it's a fact that the Cell microprocessor was hard to develop with, according to third-party video game developers, PlayStation's first-party developers knew how to get the most and best out of the tech, and proceeded to continue some of the PlayStation's most prized game series. They continued and finally ended Kratos' journey through Greece with the God of War Ascension and God of War 3. The human Hellgas war raged on with Killzone 2 and Killzone 3. They also continued the Gran Turismo series with Gran Turismo 5 and 6, as well as the Metal Gear series with Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriot. And some of the most inspired intellectual property to date started with IP created on PlayStation 3. The Last of Us series, the Uncharted series, Demon's Souls, the Infamous series, Heavy Rain, Heavenly Sword, the Resistance series, Beyond Two Souls. This was Sony's era. Sony began to create games so diverse and immersive that I likened them to playable experiences. These playable experiences helped Sony fill the gap between them and Microsoft sales-wise, till it had all but disappeared. Unfortunately, Microsoft chose not to learn this lesson. It was right in front of them. Justify the buying of their console by developing games that were all but irresistible, as PS3 did, and the fans would flock to their side. The problem? Microsoft didn't even try. Instead, they once again ignored the Japanese market and decided to go all in on their games as a service platform, only releasing what amounted to a handful of exclusives, and very little in the way of intellectual property. The only ones I was interested in were Gears of War 4, Gears of War 5, Ryse Son of Rome, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and Quantum Break. Sony, on the other hand, doubled down on the PS3 formula, mixed in with more than a little risk-taking, at least in my eyes. When entering the 8th generation console race with PlayStation 4 and its games, continuing the Killzone series, the Infamous series, Uncharted series, and the Last of Us series, and once again giving the gaming community some fantastic new IP that will entice us to buy its PlayStation 5 console in the future, just at the prospects of their sequels. Games such as Days Gone, Bloodborne, The Order 1886, Marvel's Spider-Man, Detroit Become Human, and Death Stranding. If you'll notice, I left a few off this list for a particular reason. It's so I may single them out for the risks that they took this generation. But I certainly do not want to tread old ground here, considering I talked about them in a previous video, Sony's winning formula, which I'll link below. Horizon Zero Dawn and Ghost of Tsushima were among some of the surprises this generation. Horizon Zero Dawn was created by developer Guerrilla Games, known for its first-person action games, and Ghost of Tsushima was created by developer Sucker Punch Games, known for its over-the-top third-person superhero game series. Each of these developers surprised audiences this generation by developing games that were the complete opposite of what they were known for. They were a surprise to this gamer, and I can't wait to see their sequels in the upcoming console generation. Another one that was left out was God of War. The fact that Sony Santa Monica decided to continue the continuity of the series but refresh the location, combat, and camera angle came as a delightful surprise, and it too will no doubt have a run of sequels into the PS5 generation as well. But now back to topic. So the question I'm left with is, has Microsoft learned its lesson? Are they finally going to get themselves on track and right the course? Given their poor showing at the Xbox Series X presentation, and the fact that their big gun was delayed, a game already in development for 5 years, and is said to have cost $500 million to develop, I would say no. But the 9th generation hasn't even started yet. And in a few years, when those developers that Microsoft bought and created start releasing their games, anything can happen. And I'm going to leave you with this. As a PlayStation fan, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that we need Xbox to succeed. We need Microsoft to succeed. In the early days of the PlayStation, I firmly believed that Sony's competition was Nintendo. As strange as it sounds, Nintendo at one time was in partnership with Sony. Unfortunately for them, they developed all this disc-based tech for what would have been the Nintendo PlayStation. Then Nintendo does a 180 and breaks the partnership. But instead of eating lima beans, Sony opted to take the tech they developed and they set out to prove not only can they make a game console, but they could make it better. I firmly believe that's what they've done. Now, that is personal opinion because none of what Nintendo releases is really of interest to me as a gamer. But the rivalry, the competition, is what pushed Sony to make it through those first two console generations, to try to be the best. And I think they did a great job. And now the competition has been Microsoft, for the last two generations at least. Even though nowadays Microsoft doesn't see Nintendo or Sony as competition, which I think is bullshit, but competition breeds excellence. It breeds thought and experimentation. It's why instead of matching Microsoft blow for blow, Sony says, let them be the power, we'll be the speed. Only time will tell which one will win. So hopefully, this will bring the competition back to this console war. Sony players need Microsoft and vice versa. Because without the competition, you'll see the quality of PlayStation slowly fall. There is no giant that can't be toppled. Thanks for taking the time to watch and listen. Feel free to leave a comment below if you wish.